Yeah, go.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Soham and I've been contributing to Crawl4AI for about a month now. And so far this journey has been really enriching. I have learned a lot about Crawl4AI and how to crawl websites on the internet. And so today I will show you guys a workflow of integrating Crawl4AI with n8n, which essentially just goes to show, like, the purpose behind this workflow is essentially to show you the power of Crawl4AI and how you can integrate it with a tool like n8n to really automate and build a very powerful workflow where you can do some incredible things without any manual intervention. So in today's presentation, what we will simply do is we will go ahead and we'll first look at the overview of the n8n workflow. So essentially, if you don't know, what today I'm going to show you is essentially a full workflow where we will go from keeping a track of the people who star a particular GitHub repository. Then from that particular repository, we will go forward and we will go to their profile and scrape whether they have a LinkedIn URL on their profile or not. Then we will take that LinkedIn URL and again use Crawl4AI to open up and their LinkedIn profile and then send them a connection request with a note. So we'll automate this entire workflow with n8n so that this is automatically triggered and the entire thing goes through whenever somebody just starts a repository. So there are some specific C4AI features, Crawl4AI features that we will be using to make this possible. And those features will be, performing structured extraction without using any LLMs, which is essentially the JSON CSS extraction strategy. Then we will look at how Crawl4AI allows us to perform some page interactions using JavaScript code. And then we will see how we can do some identity based crawling using Crawl4AI, because essentially whenever we want to send LinkedIn requests to anybody, we need to be logged in, otherwise we won't be able to do that. So for that we have identity based crawling that we will look at. So after the while we will look at all these specific strategies that we have and how to do them with Crawl4AI. But first I want to show you guys the n8n workflow and what we have. So this is the simple n8n workflow that I have implemented. So before this, I hadn't really created any proper n8n workflows. And this was like my first proper thing that I ever did. And honestly, I found it to be really powerful. And I believe that you guys can actually go ahead and build some incredible things by integrating Crawl4AI with n8n. So to show the workflow in brief, so the first thing that we have is I have two triggers here, but when you're actually using this workflow or when you want to implement this, you would ideally want to use only one of these triggers. So I'll explain what these two triggers does. The first one is a GitHub trigger. And so what this trigger does is essentially whenever somebody stars your GitHub repository, which in my case is like one of these repositories that I own. So whenever somebody goes ahead and stars this GitHub repository, this trigger will be activated and that person's profile and their activity will be tracked. Once this trigger gets activated, we will use the GitHub API to get a bunch of information about that particular person, and we will move forward and like extract a bunch of things. But the problem with the GitHub API is that it does not give us all the information. So we get, for example, the starter's name, the company they work at, their location, and some other information like the number of repositories they have. But we are concerned with the LinkedIn URL. And the GitHub API does not return the LinkedIn URL to us. So we would require something, a tool to scrape their GitHub profile so that we can get the LinkedIn URL. And that's where Crawl4AI comes in. So here we extract some basic information using the GitHub API, and then we just store that in a Google Sheet. And then what we do is, this is where the entire Crawl4AI pipeline actually starts. So the first thing that we will do is we will define a schema. So what we want to do is essentially we need to do structured extraction. So we will define a schema for that structured extraction, and then we will send a request to Crawl4AI, and we will essentially send a request to the Docker server, and then we'll get the response back, and the extracted content will have the LinkedIn URL. Then we will just get the LinkedIn URL from the response, and we will apply a filter, because not everybody keeps the LinkedIn URL on their GitHub profile. And afterwards, we'll simply just define some JavaScript commands for the page interactions, and in the end, we'll just perform the JavaScript interaction, send them a connection request, and then append or update the information in the sheet. So I'll just execute this workflow once. I'll show you guys what we have. We have here a test worksheet that I created. So I just took some information and I just pasted it over here. And this so for example, you can see these initial fields that we have, this is all from the GitHub API, and these last two fields that we have, this will all be from the consequence of Crawl4AI, where we will crawl their LinkedIn URL and then we'll send them a request. So I'll execute this workflow once, and then you'll be able to see what's going on. So the Google Sheets trigger first happens, and then it sends a request to our Docker server, and it looks something like this. If you guys will be, yeah, so we send a bunch of requests and like this, and then at the end we go ahead and we send a connection request. And since we're using identity based scoring, what that will do is simply it will open up a browser like this, and then automatically we'll just send them a connection request. So these are some profiles that we just scraped, and we were just going ahead, going to their LinkedIn, trying to find the connect button, then clicking on the more option, and essentially just adding a note saying, hey, nice to connect with you. And this pipeline is completely automated, so I'm not doing anything, and everything is happening on its own. The other option is the above trigger, where essentially the moment I start, this trigger will be activated, and it will just save this information to this sheet itself. So for example, this last profile here was me just starting my own repository, so this generated this, and the rest of the stuff is exactly the same. So now after this, as you guys can see, this now we have arrived at the last node, and we just save all of that information to our table, and this is the result that we finally had, right? So I have success true, like we sent the message, all of that, and in the end I have a false success, which indicates that I wasn't able to send a connection request, and that was because this was my own profile, so there wasn't I cannot send a connection request to myself, so that is why this happened at the end. Now I want to take you guys on essentially what are the specific Crawl4AI features which allow us to do this, to perform this entire workflow and allow us to like scrape the LinkedIn URL and then send them a connection request. The first thing that we have is using the JSON CSS extraction strategy with a custom schema to essentially extract the URL from the GitHub profile. So for example, I'll show you here with my own profile. We have this entire GitHub profile of this particular person, right? This is me. Now, all I am concerned with on this page is my own LinkedIn profile, right? Like this LinkedIn URL. I am not concerned with any of the other information. So ideally, when I am scraping this page, I don't want any of the other information. So to just get this particular information in a very structured format, without using LLMs, without using anything, we have the JSON CSS extraction strategy for that. So this does nothing except we just define a schema. You can generate the schema with an LLM. There's even a load or generate schema function from Crawl4AI that you can use to define the schema. And then we use this schema and we pass it to our crawler run config like so. And this just scrapes that particular information and returns us that particular information in the extracted content field. So here you can see we just define a crawler run config and we just pass the extraction strategy as JSON CSS extraction strategy, and we just pass the schema, and just like that we get our response back. So if you actually come to this node where all the magic is happening, you can see that we have just passed that exact same config here, and we've just passed this schema that we defined in the previous node, and by doing that we are able to scrape all of that information. So if we come to the schema here, for example, and I click on show data, you'll find that if we move down to the extracted content, which is over here, we find the extracted content that we had, and it's just the LinkedIn URL, and this is the only thing I'm concerned with. So we take the LinkedIn URL from here. Then the next step is to use, so the next step is actually, now the thing is, we have the LinkedIn URL, and now we want to send a connection request to this person. But we can't directly send a connection request to them because we need to be logged in to send a connection request to them. So for example, if I just open up LinkedIn on any random browser, I have to sign in to use it. And essentially, whenever you're scraping, you won't be able to you'll have to log in every single time if you want to do that. So to avoid being in this situation, Crawl4AI has this thing called persistent browser profiles, which allow you to use the same profile every single time. And essentially you can just log in once and that profile will be saved for you, and you can use that profile over and over again. So essentially, the steps of doing that is pretty simple. We have this thing called the Crawl4AI CLI tool, which is pretty simple to activate. So I'll show you here in a terminal. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to install Crawl4AI. Once you have installed Crawl4AI, all you need to do is type crwl and then space profiles. Once you do that, the Crawl4AI CLI tool will activate and it will open up the browser profile manager. Here, all you need to do is click on create new profile. And let's say we give a name to this profile saying community underscore test. The moment we do that, it will open up a browser and we can open up LinkedIn, we can log in, we can do, we can save cookies, we can interact with the websites, we can leave our digital footprint, and all of that will be saved. And the next time you scrape, it will essentially use this profile and it will appear like this is a real person. So for example, I just closed it directly, but I already have some saved profiles. The moment you can go ahead and list these profiles. So for example, here I have this community test profile that has been saved, and this path that you have, this is the important thing that you need to keep in mind. So the next time you want to use Crawl4AI, all you need to do is you need to pass this path for your persistent directory, and this will be this identity will be used every single time you're scraping. So I'll show what is going on in this. Um, I'll show you what is going on in the actual node. So when we come to the connection, sending the connection request part, if you look over here at the browser config, you can see that we have actually specified a few fields here, right? So we have set use managed browsers and we have set that to true, and then we have passed this user data directory. This user data directory is nothing but the one we just created with our LinkedIn signed in. So I did this once before when I was setting up the workflow, and here I just saved this profile with my LinkedIn logged in. And the next time I just want to run it, all I need to do is I need to go to the browser config, and I need to pass this user data directory. And the moment I do that, Crawl4AI would know, okay, this person wants to use this persistent profile. I don't need to create something new. And they will open up this profile, and all of my cookies, all of my digital footprint, all of my accounts would be locked in. And I can just simply use that, and I can just send a request with my own LinkedIn. So now let's come to the next feature, which is so I hope you guys were able to understand how we were able to set up the persistent browser profile and how we can use it while sending the requests. Now the next thing is we need to perform some interactions with the page when we are sending the request, right? So whenever I'm on LinkedIn and I need to like send a request to someone, I need to perform certain actions, right? For example, I'll just open up a random page, a LinkedIn page here. Now, for example, this person, if I want to send a connection request to them, I need to keep a few things in mind. The first one is some LinkedIn profiles have a connect button that is displayed directly over here. So if that was displayed here, all I would have done is I would have come here and clicked on the connect button here. But since it's not here, I need to go on this more button. Then I need to find the connect button and click on this. And then I need to click on add a note and then add the note here and then send the request. Now, ideally, all I need to do is I need to write the JavaScript function codes to essentially just perform these interactions that I'm doing here manually, but do them with the help of JavaScript code that we will inject. So it's pretty simple to actually use JavaScript codes with Crawl4AI. All you need to do is you need to define some commands and you need to pass it in the JavaScript code, JS_code parameter in the crawler run config. So here, for example, I will show you, we have this node called define.js commands, and all this node is doing is I have a bunch of JavaScript commands to actually perform all of that interaction, which is find the connect button, click on it, add a note and send that. And all we are doing is we're just saving that in a list containing all of those commands in different strings, and then we just pass all of that to the JS code config over here. Like you guys can see over here, all we're doing is we're passing this, and then the moment we do that, it knows that, okay, I have this JavaScript code that I need to execute. It goes ahead and it executes all of that code, and then we can see the result of all of that JavaScript execution in a field called JS execution result. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm going ahead and I'm just taking that JS execution result and I'm stored this thing that you can see right here. That's all the result of the JS execution result field, and all I'm doing is I'm storing that in the Google Sheets. So this is like the overview of the workflow, and this is how we're able to actually like perform JavaScript interactions with our page. That's what I mentioned here as well. So I'll show you what each individual node is doing over here. So for example, when we come to the scrape LinkedIn from GitHub part, I also have this thing called batching. So for example, we wouldn't want to, like, if we have like 100 accounts which are starting our repository at the same time, or if we have a lot of items that we need to scrape at once, ideally we wouldn't want to send all of them at the same time, because that wouldn't be very respectful of us and we might even get blocked. So in order to actually limit our or respect them, we can use rate limiting. That's we can pass that as a parameter in Crawl4AI as well, or in n8n we can use batching as well, with which we can actually control how many items we are sending in one batch and what interval do we want between our batches. So this is essentially one way of controlling the flow that we are sending. So in this case as well, I'll actually just bring my terminal here, and yeah, so this is my server, and I'll just simply show you what's going on when we actually execute this node. So for example, I'll just execute this step real quick, and you'll be able to see over here that we are sending a bunch of requests at the same time, but 5 at the same time, and then we just execute them in our n8n workflow, and all of these requests come in here to our server. We execute them, we scrape the LinkedIn profile. Since we just need to extract one field, it's pretty quick, and then we just take all of that, and we have 7 items here. We just go ahead and extract the LinkedIn from all of those fields. Yeah, like so we have a bunch of results in our table, 7 items. I'll just wait for it to respond once. Yeah, now I'll also like execute them one by one so that you guys can see what is going on. So for example, here we have this entire response that we just got. We'll execute it, and we'll just extract the LinkedIn URLs from all of this content, like so, by just looking at the extracted content field, which you can find if you scroll down. Yeah, so it's this field. We just extract this field right here. We can move, and then we go ahead and we use a filter. So because the thing is, not every person has a LinkedIn URL, so as you can see, these fields are null. We don't want these fields to exist when we're crawling or like using them later on in our workflow. So we'll just use this filter to remove it, and it just removes the fields that we don't need. So here you can see we only keep 3 items. We then go ahead and define our JavaScript commands in this parameter right here in this node, and we define our JavaScript commands for all 3 of those items, and then we send a connection request to all of them in an automated fashion. So yeah, I think we'll also get an error here actually, because what I did was I was actually running the browser in headless mode, and I closed the browser. So that browser context has actually been destroyed, and these nodes won't be able to run. So now I've restarted my browser and my server. So you'll be able to see that now, like, we automatically open up the browser, and we find the connect button, click on it, send add note, and then send them the request. And then we just go ahead, after all of this is done, we just go ahead, go to our sheet, this n8n test sheet, and at the end we just add the scraped LinkedIn URL that we have, and the JavaScript results that, hey, we were able to scrape them, we were able to send a request to them. And if in case our result if in case we weren't able to send them a request, then we have the error message here that, we couldn't find the action button or something like that. So I hope you guys were able to understand this entire workflow, and I tried to make it simple, and I hope it was interesting to look at as well. Now, if you guys have any questions related to the workflow, the floor is open for any questions.
So guys, like you would have to request to speak, or else like type your questions into the chat. We will read it out. Um, okay. So observer, he's asking, did you not face Cloudflare captcha issues during automation?
No, actually, I did not face any captcha issues while I was trying it out. And I think one of the biggest reasons why I didn't face any issues was because since we are using a persistent profile and I have logged in with my LinkedIn as well. And since like I also respected the rate limiting and like I did not send a lot of requests at once, then I don't think LinkedIn actually went ahead and like tried to flag me as a bot, and therefore like I didn't see any captures or anything. Yeah, like we'll also share the entire workflow demo and the documentation links. I'll share all the features and everything.
Okay.
I think
Maybe
yeah.
just one question on the Cloudflare issue. In case we want to try and go ahead and just scroll through a website which does have this captcha piece in place. I saw that Crawl4AI does have a piece where it is able to handle some captcha issues, but on other situations we would have to, of course, go ahead and have residential proxies in place so that it does not recognize us as maybe a bot. So have you like gone ahead and worked on those parameters ever?
Uh, yeah, I'll take this question. So, see, like, there are many solutions to this, right? So, one is like to basically have a proxy, so that, like, and maybe use multiple proxies. But like we are also coming up with an integration with a captcha solving service. It will be shortly put up, like whether it is Google's reCAPTCHA or like Cloudflare's Turnstile, or AWS as bot detection service. So what they'll help you do is, like via a simple API, they'll help you figure out, like the key that would basically solve the captcha challenge, and then, like let you proceed ahead with the page. um, yeah, so like other than that, so there is like multiple levels of defense for this. So one is like you could use our stealth mode, which kind of like prevents the backend service, like from fingerprinting the browser, and a couple of other things like that. But yeah, so there is an integration also that's coming up like within next week that will help you bypass a lot of captchas. Stay tuned for that announcement. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Uh,
Yes, yes, it did help. Do share the documentation on it because
yeah,
I would
yeah,
love to go through those notes and uh,
absolutely.
would like to go ahead and try it out on my solution.
Absolutely. Just follow our X handle and our LinkedIn handle. We will be announcing that partnership and also be making giving out some examples for the same. Right. Cool. There is one more question in the chat. Our Crawl4AI Docker Hub image is up to date now. A couple of months ago, they went up to date with releases. Yeah, so right now we have a CI/CD setup. Zip. So basically, like anytime we make a new release, it automatically builds a new image and puts it up on our Docker Hub. Um, yeah. Yes, we'll share the documentation. So it's a work in progress, like, but most likely within next week we should have that documentation also. So
Okay, maybe one more question on this. I'm assuming you've gone ahead and maybe worked with. So in n8n, you've gone ahead and directly used the Crawl for AI Docker, right? So in case we want to go ahead and set it up ourselves on that environment, did you have any issues maybe setting up Python and going ahead and setting up that package
Yeah.
on a node?
So essentially, what I have done is to do this, I am actually running the Docker container locally on my system, and I'm exposing the API via ngrok, which is the tunneling service. So if you guys can see over here, I'm using ngrok as a tunneling service. So essentially, like, you can run the crawl4AI docker container anywhere, and all you just need to do is hit the endpoint, right? And so I basically, ideally, you wouldn't want this to be tightly coupled, right? You would want your docker container running separately with just your crawl4AI and n8n separately, because in case one of these two things, like if let's say you're scraping a website that gets a little too intense and like takes up a lot of resource, you wouldn't want other things on your server, or let's say you have other things going on in your n8n workflow, those to be impacted as well. Regarding like setting up the docker container, you will face some issues with the identity based crawling part over here. Like, so if you move up this persistent browser profile, if you try setting it up on docker, it will be slightly harder, and we're actually working on it to provide like a simple way of setting up an identity and a browser profile on the docker container. But if you want to do it locally, it's pretty simple. These steps you'll be able to pretty simply do it, and this would work pretty fine if you're running it on your machine.
Right. I asked this because I've gone ahead and tried it locally on my
Yeah,
system. I just was questioning how you were able to get it set up on maybe a persistent system, maybe in production. So those questions do come up.
yeah. So far, I just set it up on my system as well.